All right, so we're going to get started now. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Clean and Accessible Mobility Poster Session for CivicSpark. My name is Ashoka, and I'm the Bay Area Regional Coordinator, and I will be facilitating this session along with Tim Mock, who's the RC in the Greater Los Angeles region. So this is, as you all know, a time to celebrate our fellows who have worked so hard on their projects over the last 11 months. And in this session, we'll be highlighting the fellows who have been working on clean and accessible mobility projects and learn a little bit about their service year and their impact. So just as some housekeeping, if anybody does have any technical issues, you can reach out to Tim Mock, who will be available to troubleshoot. Each fellow will present for about 5 to 6 minutes, and then at the end of each presentation, there will be some time for Q&A. So if you do have a question for a fellow after the presentation, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question, or you can type it into the chat. And the chat is also available to share kudos and appreciations for our fellows. So without further ado, I will pass it over to our first fellow to present, and that is Savannah Gill.
Thank you for attending today's poster symposium, everyone. My name is Savannah Gill, and I am an Opportunity Access Fellow serving with the San Luis Obispo Council of Governments. The focus of my project was to develop the SLO Regional Zero Emissions Bus Implementation Plan. The purpose of this plan is to address the innovative Clean Transit Regulation, which mandates transit agencies to convert to a 100% zero emission bus fleet by 2040. With incremental milestones to reach that goal starting in 2029. This plan is intended to be a transition guide and encourage transit agencies to collaborate and cooperate together on shared resources and shared costs, such as charging and fueling infrastructure, leading to agency connectivity. During the plan's development, SLOCOG staff and I met with stakeholders periodically to review draft sections and to receive comments and feedback. If you look at the top right corner of the poster next to the AmeriCorps logo, you will see a very adorable little bus that contains all of the logos of our stakeholders that participated in the advisory group. So if you look under the project overview area, you'll see a list of the major sections within the plan. And I would like to focus on the energy and power demand section. That section took the most amount of time to complete and to fully understand. The majority of the time was spent in Excel, where I was trying to replicate the sample energy demand table provided by RTA, a local transit agency within SLO County. And some time was spent customizing the energy demand tables to calculate the demand for each fleet segment. So with that, I'll be moving on to the understanding the energy demand tables part of the poster, and I'll be defining some of the key terms there. The first term is block data. Block data contains the miles driven for a given route by a bus driver during service days. Most transit agencies record block data. It is a great way to determine fuel efficiency. The second key term is dispenser ratio. This term refers to the number of connection ports per charger, meaning that if you'd like to charge 2 buses simultaneously, you would need a charger with 2 dispensers or 2 connection ports. The third key term is fleet segment. This term refers to the portion of buses in a particular bus type. For example, all of the 40-foot buses are 1 fleet segment, and all of the cutaway buses are 1 fleet segment. And the last term I would like to define is net fleet, and this term refers to the number of buses that will be in use regularly, so not including the spares. And with that, I would like to move on to the next slide. Thank you. So for this energy demand table walkthrough, I am using SLO Transit's table as an example, another local transit agency within SLO, and I'll be focusing on the circled figures. So the first circled figure is the average bus miles per day. This average is calculated using block data, and without this average, we would not be able to determine the energy demand of the transit agency. The second circled figure is the selected dispenser ratio. This ratio helps us determine the required kilowatt readings of the chargers that will need to be purchased. And the third circled figure is the net fleet segment number. And when you divide the net fleet segment number by the dispenser ratio, you then are able to calculate the total number of chargers that will be required per fleet segment. And this is the fourth circled figure. So once you determine the total number of chargers for this particular fleet segment, you can then determine the kilowatt hours of energy for that segment, and then do that for all of the fleet segments, and then take the sum of them, and that's how you are able to calculate the total kilowatt hours of energy that will be required per day for the entire battery electric buses for slow transit. So for this example table, 6,344 kilowatt hours will be required for all of the battery electric buses. And if slow transit wanted to generate their own energy for their battery electric buses, using renewable means such as solar panels, they would need to install 3,050 solar panels rated at 435 watts. And that would take up about 1.25 football fields. Just some fun facts there. And with that, I will now open up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Savannah. Any questions for Savannah? And again, feel free to unmute yourself or ask it in the chat.
Hey, Savannah, it's Kif. Great job, super cool and very detailed. I'm curious, it looked like the plan is going to be adopted. And I'm sorry, I had to jump in a little bit late if you said this. I'm curious about that timeline, and are they going to be buying a football field worth of solar panels to make it happen? This is pretty exciting.
Thanks for your question, Kif. So yes, the plan is scheduled to be adopted in August. And I know that the transit agencies have the option to work together on acquiring, let's say, their own solar panel farm, or just working together on other renewable energy resources. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Great. Any final questions for Savannah?
I see a question from Kaylee in the chat. She says, can you share a bit about the engagement process you led for SLOCOG, and then any challenges, successes in working with other agencies in the county and regionally? So yes, when I first started the plan development process, SLOCOG staff and I reached out to stakeholders that would be interested in participating in an advisory group. And through that advisory group, the stakeholders that did participate were then able to share their concerns and ask any questions about where they would like the plan, what direction they would like the plan to go in. So through that process, we did meet about every 4 to 6 weeks. We were able to improve upon the plan monthly. And let's see, any challenges and successes? I would say one of the challenges mainly was to learn myself how to understand the energy demand tables. That's why I wanted to showcase it, because I put a lot of time into those tables, and I'm very proud of the work that I have done. And I would say some of the major successes that have occurred are that I did present to the SLOCOG board about 2 times before this, and I will be presenting to them in about 2 weeks to present the final draft plan. Beforehand, I had introduced the plan to them during its development stage, and then also again as a first draft. And so I would consider their support in the plan as a major success.
Great, congrats, Savannah. And we will move on now to Ali Lehman. Oops, sorry. Here we go.
Hi, everyone. Like Ashoka just mentioned, my name is Ali Lehman, and I spent this past year serving the Sacramento Air Quality Management District. I worked on a few projects, but today I'm going to talk about Clean Cars for All, which is a program where we, the Air District, give money to people that meet certain income requirements to replace their old polluting cars with an electric vehicle. I spent the last 6 months refining the application and related workflows of this project. There's so many barriers that are faced by so many people when using online government applications, like reading comprehension, internet or computer access, and my focus was really to shrink some of the barriers that were more in the Air District's control. Many bad experiences with government don't happen on purpose, but by accident, because we fail to look at what the experience is like for the people that we serve. Shifting to a focus on user experience, which is often called delivery by web designers and other people in tech, is really important. And I'm going to borrow this vocabulary for my presentation. Often it isn't the government organization's fault when they fail to carefully consider delivery. Program funding structures are very rigid. You win or distributed money by some other means, you submit a few basic reports, you finish your project, and then you never look at that project again. There are rarely funds or organizational time to carefully evaluate programs and update them iteratively. But that's really what they need to be successful. For two projects unrelated to Clean Cars for All, one about updating CaliMod and one about urban heat islands, I assessed user needs and comments about government projects and services. I was able to pair this data with a comprehensive user analysis that the Bay Area conducted about their version and application for Clean Cars for All. I tried to incorporate user needs in from the beginning of the development of this Clean Cars for All application. So this is our first attempt at the application. And the program we used to edit the application, which is actually pictured here, the biggest picture, is really easy to edit. So I'm hoping that it will be revisited as more people start to apply for the program and get more feedback. There are three main areas for friction, according to my research, that people meet, or that happen when the government and people meet. First, we have a black box. People really want to be heard and acknowledged in a more personalized way. I've noticed a lot of complaints about the government sending emails that seem really spammy and have weird subject lines, and then they end up getting deleted and people don't have the information that they need when applying to these types of programs. For Clean Cars for All, I worked with another staff member to really simplify these emails and make sure that they seem more personable. They're still automated, so they actually aren't personal, but they seem more personal, and they are accessible to a wide range of reading levels, which is really important so that your project is accessible. Second is time. Government is generally inconsiderate of people's time. Program and services ask for a lot of information, and oftentimes the technology is really time consuming to use. To tackle this time issue, we tried to put the requirements front and center so people aren't dragged through this whole process if they don't qualify. And we added a mini quiz at the beginning so people can quit the application if they don't qualify. Last is understanding the process. People really, when they're applying, don't often understand what's being asked of them and what they need to do. For our program in particular, the trouble arose with documents and trying to upload them, make sure they're having the right type of documents. We require a bunch of documents that are a little bit more complicated and not as common. So we tried to do a good job of providing supplemental information so people can have explanations about the documents they need to submit, and also have this information in the beginning so people know before they start to apply. But the information we do provide is something that will definitely need to be tested. So yes, we were very much on the beginning portion of this. We have just finished our first version of this application. It's supposed to roll out soon, which is exciting. But I'll close today by saying, yeah, websites and online tools are just as much government infrastructure as roads and waterways, whatnot. And they really do and should have, they really do need and should have that level of consideration and planning when we're thinking about them. Thank you.
Thanks, Allie. Any questions for Allie?
Hey, this is Kip. I don't have a question, but I just tried your eligibility quiz. It was very easy. I passed with fake numbers, but I passed. So that was cool. Thank you.
I love that. I actually wasn't the one who developed that. I was one of the people who went through that data, but one of our tech people made that quiz, but I think it was a really great addition.
Yeah, it's so nice to be able to exit people before they get too far. It's very thoughtful of their time and resources.
And Ali, this is Shelly. I think it's really cool how you use the data from the other projects to try to inform how the Clean Cars for All system could work. I think that's really clever.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that the centering user needs is something that is arising in a lot of projects, not just the things that are not just grant programs where people are applying to, but even with CaliMod, which is a program that people use for air quality, so many complaints about it. And it's really because they didn't center user needs and take this more delivery approach to developing it. Well, thank you, everyone.
Great, thanks, Ali. Alrighty, and we will move on to Kiara Ryan.
Hello, I'm Kiara, and for the past 11 months, I've been serving at the Sonoma County Transportation Authority and Regional Climate Protection Agency, focusing on mobility shift initiatives. And today I will be speaking about my work on the Marin Sonoma Bike Share pilot program. This program is funded through a Metropolitan Transportation Commission grant and works to address the first last mile issue that can often dissuade commuters from using public transportation in place of single occupancy vehicle commuting. So my scope of work for this project was originally to design and implement efforts for the pre-launch outreach, which consists of collecting community input on service area location. As a result of unforeseen delays and the challenge of COVID, I was unable to do so. So I decided instead to pivot to the creation of a toolkit that would improve facilitation of equity goals for the pre-launch outreach. I utilized case studies and articles to determine how to incorporate equity into outreach and into a bike share program specifically. So many of the recommendations were unrealistic for the situation I found myself in. For example, building strong relationships with stakeholders is challenging during a time of COVID when they're dealing with the consequences. Ultimately, after consulting with a co-fellow, Ali Hoff, who has been working on an equity report card for her own service project, I decided to focus my attention on benchmarking or metric tracking as a way to create a baseline understanding of equity in outreach and to ensure goals were being met throughout the process. So how did I do that? First, I outlined the goals that were required, whether specified in MTC guidelines, the program agreement, or coordination agreement. And then I added some of the recommended goals that I found throughout my research. Next, I moved on to determining the metrics that would be used for each of these goals. Some of the required goals had already specified metrics, but others were broadly written. So I used research to kind of determine achievable and measurable metrics. And then once I determined what the goals and metrics were, I was able to construct a tracking document that is accessible and easy to use. And I also created supplemental documents to offer additional resources. So the targeted contact list is an example of a resource that I created, and it supplements the MTC goal, which states that 20% of the service area for the bike share program should be within 1/4 of a mile of an MTC designated community of concern. And I thought that this was important to include because instead of focusing on reaching just this goal, it's important to determine the locations that individuals living within the communities of concern would be able to and want to access. So I created a contact list for housing agencies within that area and businesses that could be contacted for input on which locations are best. And after pre-launch is conducted, equity considerations moving forward should continue to be a priority. In addition to using this toolkit as a baseline to grow from, the program should continue to address barriers such as language and education. One example is to host a bike riding class in conjunction with a free helmet giveaway. And then Ashoka, if you can move to the next slide, please. So this is just a closer look at how I created the contact list. I utilized MTC's community of concern map and put that onto a Google map and was able to find housing locations as well as businesses and record this into an Excel document for later use. And the next slide, please. This is the Bike Share Equity Metric Tracking Guide. So broke it down into targets. We have multicultural outreach, low income outreach, and then student outreach, and then focusing on the specific actions for each of those. For example, gathering input or raising awareness, whether or not it's required. And then we included the metrics in the next column. And then I also included inclusion information on the far right column. And this is where I put if it was specified in MTC deliverables, in the program agreement, or coordination agreement. And then next, well, my hope is that this toolkit has strengthened the ability of SCTA and the program operator to proceed with the bike share program and achieve each of the equity goals necessary for the program's success. So thank you. You can move to the next slide, but it's just any questions.
Thanks, Kiara. Any questions for Kiara?
Can I jump? I have a question. Are you going to be releasing this or sharing via NAPSA or any of the other bike share micromobility groups, and or can you share it with SACOG?
I certainly could. It was made specifically for this program, and I would reach out to my supervisor just to make sure that's okay. But definitely, yes.
I think I saw earlier that someone had their hand up, but the hand seemed to have disappeared, but you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question.
I think that was me. I just asked my question.
Oh, sorry about that.
Looks like there's a question in the chat as well. Can you elaborate on the metrics that you used?
Sure. So specifically, like I can talk about the metrics for whether or not the service area 20% is within 1/4. That would be miles or distance from the service area. And then I can pull up the other. Could you go back to that slide? I can actually read them. How many system brochures were made in Spanish or an alternate language? How many letterheads were made in Spanish? I'm just tending to read those. And then map presentations, so looking at the system setup, how many presentations were conducted in a community of concern? Who's the one who asked? Did you have any specific questions, Savannah, on a metric?
No, no specific ones, but it was hard for me to read, so I wanted to see if you could elaborate more on them.
I know, that's why I made the labels pretty large, because you can't read them at all. But if you want, I can share it with you after.
I have a follow-up on the metrics and the goals, I guess. Are there ones that you see as sort of, I don't know, primary, right? Like there may be some that are really big levers of change for inclusion and equity versus others that might be more just indicators of activity. Is there something you would point to that are like, if somebody's going to do this, they should do these?
That's kind of why I included the required, which is a column, because there are certain ones that are required by MTC. And I do think that those are very important, specifically focusing on the program being located close to a community of concern. So probably those, I really do think, I mean, personally, I think that they're all valuable, and they all have the capacity to lead to change. And then again, this is focused more on creating a baseline just so that you can grow from here. So I think that you can keep adding metrics if you find that, you're missing something later down the line. Does that answer the question, Kit?
Yeah. Just like hearing, kind of where you see the big ones and the opportunities and sort of shine a light on it. So thank you.
Any final questions? All right, thank you again, Kiara. And we're going to move into the presentation from David.
Hi, how's everybody doing? My fellowship was with the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, and my project focused on technical assistance within SACOG funding programs. So SACOG, through its regional funding programs, delivers direct technical assistance and tools to member jurisdictions seeking to build planning capacity or to promote local efforts for sustainable development. Technical assistance can be through, the format of direct consultants who bring their expertise and skill sets, or through staff who, offer their gamut of planning and policy assistance. This technical assistance can be tailored to community needs, and they can be also one-on-one when it's just direct. There's also the technical assistance that is in the form of online resources like interactive mapping tools, toolkits, templates, best practices, model ordinances, and references to webinars and workshops. And although the scope of technical assistance is flexible, it sort of remains within the parameters of the program intent. And that's important because it allows for technical assistance to be sort of systemized. And although these programs, differ in their intent or their effects, they have an underlying similarity, and that is that they're sort of linked by a blueprint strategy, which is a framework for smart growth. They're also influenced by the direction offered by the MTPSES, the long-term planning goals, that sort of dictates how SACOG would move in the near future, and what sort of planning strategies they're laying out for the near, say, 8 years or 4 years. So the spirit of the research that I conducted was understanding how programs should measure the effect of their technical assistance, specifically the impact that technical assistance has on outputs and outcomes, and more specifically understand the alignment of the MTPSES and the blueprint with those outcomes. So the process that I took to research these questions was essentially first reading significant amount of information that pertain to the agency, like, for example, a long-term regional goal. The long-term regional plan, which is also the MTPSES. Reading a lot of documents from the SACOG website, and the Brookings Institute report, which was an assessment of the Sacramento region and how it compares to other similar size cities in growth, prosperity, and inclusion. I tried initially to order this information in a way that I could be easier for me to understand. So I initially started putting the information in logic models, which are schematics for how do you track change and track models. I mean, how do you track changes, and maybe how do you measure that more specifically? That wasn't as direct as I wanted it to be. So another component that I tried was interviews. Obtaining primary sources through interviewing project managers to get a better idea of just the logic of the program and its direction and its intended goals, and also reading archival documents that pertain to those programs and that were either in a SharePoint, or they sent it to me themselves. The project manager sent me those documents. And there was also the secondary part of the secondary sources that I had to read. And this followed, a typical literature review process where I obtained documents and toolkits and other online resources that try to, get at that question of how technical assistance affects outcomes and outputs of certain programs, of certain similar programs. And then the very last step was synthesizing and interpreting information. What I found out is that there's usually three main frameworks that are promoted by outside literature, and it's to evaluate programs' performance. And they don't not necessarily tie back to technical assistance, because although they allude to it, that there's a need for more research in this field, they give criteria for or criteria and formats for maybe measuring program performance. And they usually say that you need a process-based metrics, implementation-based metrics, and goal-based metrics. And they call out for the need for planning specific metrics, which to me, those were essentially what I was looking for, because they tie it back into technical assistance, because they tend to focus more on output metrics, which are more immediate, as opposed to the outcome metrics. And some of the observations that I saw too throughout my reading was that there's usually this idea that since programs are locally defined, and then there's variety in stakeholders, then that means that, you know, the criteria for solution design is again, it's going to be inconsistent if you take into account, you know, interagency goals, interagency principles, and also the idea that agencies sort of prioritize differently, which means that they measure differently, because they, again, they consider outcomes differently than other agencies. Like, for example, livability for a housing program will not be the same as livability for a transportation program, if that's your outcome that you're trying to focus on. So yeah, or they might focus on sub-elements that might not pertain to the through my specific area of focus. So what I created was a document that laid out what I had found in these outside sources, you know, to better maybe help or aid future developments of or frameworks for measurements. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Any questions for David? And again, you can add that into the chat or feel free to unmute yourself.
This is Monica Hernandez. I work at SACOG. I just want to say thanks to David. I think Adrian is on here as well. It's been a wonderful experience on our part, and he was a great part of our team. We miss him a lot since we don't get to be together.
Hi, Monica.
We have a question in the chat here. David, is SACOG moving ahead with more standardization of evaluation and technical assistance practices?
From last that I was there, there was, I mean, you can't, for last time that I was there was a program that focuses on innovative mobility, and they had planned to implement some sort of metrics that would be standardized, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm not sure if they're applying it. They're going to apply something like that throughout all the programs. I mean, there's metrics that are outlined in the long-range plan, but sort of the idea of researching how technical assistance affects those long-term plan goals. That was the idea of researching if it's possible to implement that. Research, I don't know, tells me differently than that.
Great. Any final questions? All right, we will move on to Gianna, Meschi. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Gianna. I served my fellowship year with Placer County in their planning division and the Department of Public Works. I assisted them with lots of greenhouse gas emission reduction tasks, but the biggest one that I helped them with was the implementation of SB 743. Senate Bill 743, or SB 743, as I will probably be referring to it, was passed in 2013 and revised in 2019. It requires lead agencies such as Placer to implement a new transportation metric by July 1st, 2020. This means moving from the industry standard of level of service to vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. And VMT is a measurement of distance traveled regardless of the number of passengers in the car, whereas LOS is used on roadways to assign quality levels of traffic based on different measures. So simply put, 743 changes the focus of transportation impact analysis in CEQA from measuring impacts to drivers to measuring the impacts of driving. The legislative intent of 743 is to better align traffic impact analysis and mitigation outcomes with the state's goals, which include reducing greenhouse gas emissions, encouraging infill development, and improving public health through more active transportation. Placer County began work on 743 in late June 2019, but really jumped headfirst in September 2019, which is when I arrived at the county. 743 has an implementation deadline of July 1st, 2020, so it fit really well with my timeline and CivicSpark. In order to actually implement 743, Placer County needed to identify an analysis methodology and establish a threshold for various project types and land use settings. To do this, they onboarded a transportation consulting firm, Fair and Peers, to evaluate available travel demand models, prepare impact analysis guidelines, and customize a project level tool for VMT calculation, and identify any feasible mitigation measures that are available for Placer County. That being said, Placer County's landscape and land use is really unique. It stretches from the urban areas of Roseville all the way through the rural areas of the Sierra Nevadas, all the way up to North Lake Tahoe. So creating a transportation metric that works for everyone is quite a feat. Many county residents commute long distances to work, especially into the Sacramento area. And this, coupled with the tourism draw from Bay Area residents to Tahoe, just created a storm of difficulties in implementing transportation strategies that could benefit everybody. So we had to be really strategic and creative in our solutions. The county's approach was shaped on the following goals for a preferred threshold, which were to facilitate growth in Placer County, comply with the requirements of 743, strive to achieve any reduction strategies that were outlined in the Placer County Sustainability Plan, and then make sure that the threshold was relatively simple to understand and administer. So with those goals in mind, early this year, we held 2 focus group meetings for the development and technical practitioner communities. One was in Tahoe City and the other in Auburn. The presentations included just some initial recommendations on the VMT metrics and our work at that point in time. Both were really helpful to receive feedback from CEQA practitioners, traffic engineers, local agencies, and the development community. After those workshops, our team went to the Board of Supervisors to present several threshold options, findings, and receive any recommendations on how they'd like us to move forward. We received some feedback that indicated that the board wanted staff to continue working on developing a more robust threshold option for them to consider. That being said, Placer County faced quite a few obstacles during the path to implementation, the biggest being the land diversity that I mentioned earlier. Unlike more urban areas like San Francisco, who can fairly easily remove LOS completely from their transportation metric, Placer is much more spread apart, which makes mitigation strategies difficult and a total loss of LOS virtually impossible. So it will remain part of our strategy. Another issue that we ran across is the lack of jurisdictions that it implemented and the lack of case law.
Because implementing a new metric is such a daunting task, many lead agencies kind of held back and waited to follow suit to similar jurisdictions. Our challenge was that the agencies that had implemented were land use contexts completely different from Placer County for the most part. They were often more rural, or sorry, more urban, and didn't face the same unique urban-rural interface challenges as we did. And because of these challenges and the obvious hurdles that we've had to overcome with the pandemic, Placer County did not implement by the July 1st deadline. County staff is continuing to collect feedback and recommendations on metrics, methodologies, and thresholds, and we're working towards an adoption by the end of 2020. Thank you.
Thanks, Gianna. Any questions coming in for Gianna?
This is Crystal Jacobson with Placer County. I don't have a question, but I just wanted to first thank Gianna for all of her work on this project. She has been a pleasure to work with. She's really helped add capacity to both the planning department and the Department of Public Works as we embarked upon this very challenging work program. So thank you, Gianna. We are all excited to see what your future holds, and we are going to miss you.
Thank you, Crystal. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. All righty. And there's other kind of kudos in the chat as well coming through. With that, we will move on to our next presenter, Jerel Francisco.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, my name is Jerel Francisco, and I'd just like to start off this presentation by saying that this presentation does not intend to obstruct or promote any of the businesses mentioned. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. So during my service here, I was serving the County of Santa Barbara Department of General Services to electrify their light-duty motor pool fleet. Throughout my service here, I supported all things related to vehicle electrification within the County of Santa Barbara. Oh, sorry, one back. So pretty much the scope of this project and what I was working towards was to replace 50 internal combustion engine vehicles or ICE vehicles into battery electric or BEV vehicles and install all necessary electrical infrastructure to support these vehicles. So you're probably wondering, how do you electrify a fleet and what exactly did I do to support the team? My role ended up being to provide advice for EVSE or electric vehicle service equipment, AKA charging station vendors, procure around 50 battery electric vehicles and support the assistant director when going to the board of supervisors or electric vehicle project updates. So specifically going to the EVSE vendor selection, I took my knowledge from electric vehicle planning from the city of Sacramento to select an EVSE vendor to meet the needs of the county's operations. And some of the things that we considered in selecting a vendor was that that they had a smart charging management system, they had a durable electric vehicle charging station, and we were able to procure all the construction materials at the right price. The county decided to move forward with a vendor called PowerFlex Systems at a $0 amount upfront. The deal was made possible due to a program administered by the California Air Resources Board called the Low Carbon Fuel Standard Program. The deal provided the county with 71 EVSE, and breaking that down, we got 68 level 2s and 3 DC fast chargers in exchange for the county's credits over a 5-year period. I was able to value the fiscal potential of these credits, which I'll go into later. And due to this deal, the county is looking forward to being involved in the LCFS program in the near future. For vehicle selection, I advise the county to procure a Chevy Bolt due to its vehicle range of around 259 miles, price point of around $36,000. After state and dealership incentives, the county was able to procure the Chevy Bolt at a price of around $27,000, saving the county around $500,000. Some areas that I tried to address throughout my project include access to clean mobility. For this, I incorporated some things I learned from the city of Sacramento, specifically in 2 areas. These areas are in MUD access to EVSE, or in other words, apartment dwelling access to EVSE. And so for those who don't know, there's a charging gap in the EV world, specifically for apartments, whether it be because upfront costs, it's too expensive to install a charging station at an apartment, or lack of knowledge, or just resistance from the landowner to install one for the residents. Because of this, I advised the county to allow residents to charge overnight between the time of 9 p.m. and 6 p.m. when electricity is cheapest. And this was approved by the board, I believe, last week. The other area of access to clean mobility I tried to incorporate was bilingual accessibility for the electric vehicle charging station app that you need to use to access the PowerFlex charging stations. The county of Santa Barbara has a relatively large Spanish-speaking population, and approximately around 30% of the city of Santa Barbara's population speaks Spanish at home. So in order to provide access to Spanish speakers, I approached PowerFlex and asked them for a cost estimate to provide a bilingual smartphone application. The smartphone application is necessary to access certain smart charging features of the PowerFlex EVSE. However, the cost of $72,000 was a little too high given our existing budget for the project, but the county will be potentially pursuing this idea in the near future. Next slide, please. So in this image, you can see around 3 circles. The 2 black circles indicate where the 71 EVSE will be distributed within the county of Santa Barbara. The red circle indicates a different funding source of EVSE in the city of Lompoc, where there's a large density of MUD populations, around 8 MUD units within a 0.5-mile proximity of the EVSE installation that we'll be doing over there. And all of these charging stations will be available between the times of 9 p.m. and 9 a.m. Next slide, please. And these are just our first delivery of the bolts, and we have the charging stations on the wall at one of our shops at General Services. Next slide. And this is just a close-up of the charging stations. And then we'll go into the last part of the LCFS credit evaluation. Thank you. So the LCFS credit program is a program that incentivizes low intense carbon fuels within the transportation sector. And the way I value these credits is through a California Air Resources Board calculator, and everything bolded over there is an input into the calculator, such as carbon intensity, the average price of the credit trading in 2019, the energy efficiency ratio when converting from ICE vehicle to battery electric vehicle, and then gasoline usage, which was converted to kilowatt hour conversion. And next slide, please. And I put these all into the calculator, and I was able to get a trading price of around 16 cents per kWh over a 5-year period, and that added up to around $500,000, give or take, based off those inputs earlier. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Any questions?
There's a question in the chat box here.
Yes,
Jerel, Santa Barbara County working with the local utility to work out a discount for using electricity during off-peak hours.
So yes, that was on the table, and I think PG&E, because Santa Barbara split up into 2 IOU territories, PG&E just came out with their rate structure, and it works out in terms of whether or not we're going to hit that demand charge. Because if we do hit that demand charge, then that that peak hour discount would be ideal to approach the utilities with. So question, does anybody know, I don't know that one off the top of my head.
A quick question, Jerel. This is Kif. On that last slide with the range of the high, I'm not as familiar. So you trade on a market for those savings? Forgive my ignorance.
No, that's okay. It's a pretty complex program. So you essentially have to register as a party within the program. And once you register as a party, you report on the amount of kWh or the quantity of electricity you use per quarter, or I think per month. And you could essentially save those credits into a bank, and then in order to trade those credits, you have to be registered with a broker who goes through carbon trading, which can trade the cleaner or the less carbon intensive fuel that you're using, the higher value the credits are.
Got it. I think so. That sounds great. But it's only at a fleet scale, right? Not an individual scale.
I'm sorry, what was that?
And now that's only for like fleets, like a pool of vehicles, not individual consumer.
Yeah, well, I mean, essentially anybody can really be involved in the program. Like if I got a charging station at my place and did the formal registration at the CARB website for my regular light or for my regular electricity outlet, I could essentially trade within that credit market. But ideally, fleets make it more feasible, or this program makes it more feasible for fleets to get their payback over a period of time.
Thanks.
Yep.
Got a comment and question from Edgar. Edgar loves that you created an equity component. Jerel, were there any large equity concerns that you encountered in your project?
Not concerns. It's just more steps that need to be taken in order to ensure that that the residents do know that these charging stations are available. Like I said before, our Lompoc installation will be really close to around 8 to 7 multi-unit dwelling properties, which are within a 0.5 mile radius of the installation. So I think we're going to have to the county's going to have to do some outreach to those communities afterwards. And another question I see, so are the chargers available to the public too? Yes, some of the chargers will be available to the public, and most of them will be prioritized for fleet charging. But yes, at all the locations, there will be publicly available chargers as well as DC fast chargers.
Great, thank you so much, Jerel. And we'll move on to our next presenter, Yeymi Rivas.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. So my name is Yeymi. I'm the Climate Fellow at the City of Berkeley, serving in the Office of Energy and Sustainable Development, so OESD. At OESD, I conduct community outreach events around climate action. So topics covered during my outreach work include home electrification, joining community choice energy providers, and what I mostly dedicated my time to was an electric vehicle one-on-one workshop. So when looking at climate action goals and reducing greenhouse gas emissions in Berkeley, transportation is an important sector to cover because it accounts for 60% of the city's emissions. But just in general, transportation is the biggest greenhouse gas emitter for around the Bay Area. So the EV 101 workshop is an opportunity to change the way that we see transportation and hopefully reduce the number of gas cars at our streets. The workshop was actually created by 350 Bay Area, a local nonprofit, and San Francisco Department of the Environment a couple years back, but it was piloted in Berkeley the summer prior to my arrival. It showed a lot of success, so we pushed the workshop forward once I joined the team. The EV workshop itself is one that aims to inform the public about the health and economic benefits of driving EVs, the various regional, state, and federal incentives that are being offered to buy an electric vehicle, and the consumer resources that reduce barriers to EV adoption. So the emphasis of the workshop is that EVs are affordable. For example, one of the things that we mentioned in the workshop is something that Ali mentioned in her presentation, a scrap and replace program funded by Bay Area Quality Management District called Clean Cars for All, where you can turn in your vehicle 2004 or older to get funding for a new EV. So many of these resources are great, and the workshop aims to make them more visible to the public. So with the workshop, I was able to revamp some of the slides, update graphics and information. For example, the first version of the PowerPoint did not include information about the new and growing used EV market, and now it helps attendees locate the markets in the Bay Area. Additionally, the PowerPoint now has information that is specific to each county regarding topics such as their clean choice energy provider to help them find the best time to charge their EVs at home. I was also able to translate the workshop fully into Spanish to bring the information to a wider range of the community. So that includes the PowerPoint, the emails that are sent out, and also the fact sheets. So once that was done, I researched and reached out to local community organizations that could be potential partners and hosts to bring the workshop to the community. I reached out to organizations that the city has a long history of working with, but paid particular attention to organizations that have not been previously contacted by the city or just didn't have a relationship with the city. So with these organizations, we offered listening sessions and conversations about whether or not this workshop was something that was feasible for the organization or if they wanted to dedicate their time to. So something I learned during this outreach phase is that building community relationships takes time. For example, there was this one organization that I had a back and forth email exchange for about 4 months, and eventually we were not able to host a workshop with them due to just organizational priorities. But conversations like these lay a foundation for a potential future partnership and start to build trust and find ways to collaborate in the future. But by March, we hosted 3 total in-person workshops, 1 in El Cerrito and 2 in Hayward, one of the Hayward ones being in Spanish. We were able to host our last EV workshop online through Zoom for the city of San Leandro. But after that, the pandemic halted our plans. So most of our conversations about potential workshops were halted or canceled, given that cities like ours and just other organizations had more important priorities during the pandemic. So we didn't want to be tone deaf with everything happening. But in total, we received 172 workshop attendees for all workshops. And the workshop showed varying success. So the El Cerrito workshop catered to about 90 participants, while the Spanish workshop in Hayward only really brought in 2 participants, 7 if you count the people that actually made it happen. But after the workshops were hosted, we sent follow-up emails to all participants about the resources and provided guidance as needed. And the PowerPoint was created with intentions to be shared in cities all over the Bay. So moving forward, I hope that 350 Bay Area and the city of Berkeley can capitalize on this to help spread awareness of EVs in the future. Yeah, so thank you for your time, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thanks, Yeymi. Any questions for Yeymi?
How do you do a question? Hi. Hey, this is Rebecca from City of Berkeley.
Hi, Rebecca, we can hear you.
Apologize, we've got staff members who are trying to get on and back and forth with them. Anyway, we just wanted to say that our team loved working with Yeymi, and that through the fellowship, she was really able to expand outreach, as you saw, beyond the city and strengthen relationships with community organizations and other local governments. She also contributed to many other projects, and she doesn't even know this news yet, but late last night, one of the projects she worked on, which was an electric mobility roadmap, was adopted by our city council. So Yeymi really helped to highlight the local voices in that roadmap, and I just wanted to thank her and congratulate her.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Awesome, congrats. Any other final questions for Yeymi?
Hi, Amy. This is Edgar. Super curious and would love to learn a little bit more about the community engagement process. Was there any concerns or any challenges in there and solutions that you came and working with the community and uplifting their voices as well, and this great work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, we were just trying to, in general, reach out to community members that from the pilot workshops we noticed weren't attending. So this was just like preliminary, I guess, like work to do outreach with the community, with like people from different parts of the community. So it was a lot of just cold emailing, cold calling, and trying to be very, I guess, understanding of organizational needs. EV workshops like sound random and can be like arbitrary to organizations that have other priorities. So we're trying to emphasize listening during just initial conversations. But yeah, I don't know if that answered your question or if you have any other comments on that.
Another question here in the chat box. Yeymi, do you have any information on actions taken from the education program?
Yeah, so we didn't really track actions after the educational programs. We do, I know that like people would call the office sometimes to ask follow-up questions. Like, for example, if people were still struggling with some of the websites that we told them about, we would answer those calls and just like try to walk them through, but don't really know how many people actually followed through with buying an electric vehicle.
Great, thank you, Yeymi. And we'll move on now to the final speaker, Sunny Zhao.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for attending and sharing, and everyone who went before me. My name is Sunny Zhao, and I am a fellow serving the city of Culver City, along with my co-fellow Cassandra Cortez, who presented on one of our other projects last week. I'm excited to speak to you today about the Ballona Creek Revitalization Project with our beneficiary, the City of Culver City's Community Development Department. For some background, please draw your attention to the top left image. This concrete-lined waterway that you see flows through Culver City and into the ocean. It is called Ballona Creek. Originally a natural stream, it was engineered as a flood control channel in the 1930s. Ballona Creek is a critical resource for flood control, but also for water quality management, ecological restoration, active mobility, recreation, community connections, and more. I've lived in this area nearby throughout the service year, and I've ridden along the Ballona Creek bike path many times to commute to City Hall or to ride towards the coast. And I can attest that it's a wonderful breath of fresh air to be away from traffic in urban streets, but it's also an area that can be overlooked by community members who don't know about it. So that's why the city's Ballona Creek Revitalization Project aims to further realize the potentials of this creek and enhance restoration and mobility. And looking at the top right, the poster, this year, our main capacity building goals lay in establishing revitalization as a priority for the city. Previous rounds of fellows worked on creating a property atlas map and on conducting community outreach. And city staff work on this project, but they also juggle many other projects as well. So our involvement helps to bring focus and time and resources to the project. To advance with revitalization, some important needs are to secure funding sources and develop shovel-ready project plans. So these are two areas that could move forward simultaneously, and our research helped address both these areas. We ultimately presented options to a council subcommittee, and the presentations that we gave helped build relationships between city departments as well as helping to gain approval and support from city leaders for taking next steps. One of the next steps that we gained approval for was to write an action plan request for proposals, an RFP. This RFP would help solicit consultants to create an action plan that would lay out plans for short-term, mid-term, and long-term projects that could be implemented for the revitalization. We drafted this RFP and collaborated with our supervisors. However, the city did not receive a Caltrans grant that would have helped fund the development of this plan. However, we also researched other funding options in the bottom left of this poster. And one of our high-level strategies was to consider how funding and project ideas could involve the commercial areas along the creek. For example, if we could build a new access point to the creek bike path, maybe this could allow businesses nearby to experience higher customer traffic. And this could justify looking at those businesses to collaborate and as a source of funding. Also, increasing access points along the creek was a major improvement that we looked at because it could improve accessibility and perceptions of safety along the creek, which were issues identified with previous rounds of fellows with community outreach. On the bottom right, I've highlighted a few of our research items regarding different projects that we could implement. We mainly looked at projects of low cost or short term, or projects that could have potential partnerships. For example, glow-in-the-dark bike paths could be a pilot project. And we followed this strategy because we knew that small scale successes could help garner confidence for larger projects in the long run, especially when we don't have any secure funding yet. We also researched some policies relating to anti-displacement and food vending that would help guide the revitalization project. And the picture in the bottom right is an example of an online service we use called Pictometry, similar to Google Earth, that helped us examine and mark up regions of project interest. So if the blue line is the creek, the red would outline some businesses along the creek. And overall, we succeeded in building capacity by gaining approval and interest from the city, and also producing a lot of foundational research for funding and short-term projects. However, COVID-19 does put other priorities in front of Ballona Creek Revitalization Project. So obtaining funding could be more difficult at this time. However, the lessons and research that we have are still relevant, and the ideas of working with businesses and partnerships remain relevant. And city staff may consider future partnerships in the future. So I look forward to seeing how Creek Revitalization will continue in the future. And thank you, everyone. That's the end. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Thanks, Sunny. Any questions for Sunny? I'll start off. I was just curious a little bit about if you could speak a little bit more to the anti-displacement policies and sort of how that played into the rest of your research and kind of where that was stemming from.
Yes, definitely. Both me and my co-fellow worked on this, and she did a little bit more research on that part. But after having the subcommittee presentation, it was brought up that we should have an anti-displacement policy in place for the revitalization, since there are encampments along the creek, and so any type of revitalization could affect that situation. So our research, we looked at LA River if they had any situations, but we mainly looked at it at a high level topic. But I can get back to you on that and talk to my co-fellow as well.
Cool, thank you. Other questions? Again, feel free to unmute yourself or add something to the chat. Looks like there's a question that just came in the chat.
Oh, yes, I see a question about art and glow in the dark bike paths. Yes to both. We didn't work directly with it, but we were very aware. There were actually some murals, new murals that were put in the bike path at some of the access points to the bike path this year. So it's just part of something that was happening with the city, and that was extremely exciting to see. Glow in the dark bike paths, there are some examples of these in Europe and an instance in Texas that uses a material that would soak up UV rays from the sunlight during the day, and at night it would glow. I think it's a little bit expensive, still need some funding to implement it, but there was some interest to potentially think about piloting this for the bike path. That could bring in a lot of interest and engagement.
Great. There's another question from Kaylee. Kaylee's remembering that she actually interviewed you for CivicSpark, and just curious about if there's any ways of incorporating art into a project like this.
Yes, definitely. So some of the murals that were done, there were some previous murals done in the past, but this year there were some new murals done with an artist working with some kids in school, and the art students helped create designs, and then the professional artist implemented those designs on the bike path as you ride in there. And definitely looking at short-term projects that could be done for the creek, like art is definitely an option for that we're interested in.
Great. Any final questions for Sunny?
I have another question. Hi, Sunny. Just, knowing that the Ballona Creek, ends up going to the ocean in Santa Monica, and I imagine there's adjacent parks nearby. Just curious about your thoughts about just, access to outdoors and green space and public places like that in LA, what you've kind of been learning about that.
Yeah, I think that's extremely exciting. I think if Ballona Creek could be revitalized more, it would not just impact Culver City, but also all the other parkways and bike paths that it's connected to. So if you bike down Ballona Creek, it does go to the creek, and then you can actually bike all the way to Redondo Beach or somewhere. It's all connected. I think it would be really neat if there could be a bike path extension more closer to downtown LA. Then that could connect downtown LA all the way to the coast, and that would connect all the communities along the path as well. So it would be access for many people. There's also a grant that we saw at one point that was about trying to give coastal access to more communities, and bike paths could be a way.
Awesome, thanks.
Great, thanks, Sunny. And thank you to the rest of the presenters today. That was our final presentation. But before I let you all go, just wanted to mention that we do have one more session tomorrow at 1 p.m. on engaging vulnerable communities. So you all are welcome to that. And you all are also welcome to our graduation ceremony, which will be on July 30th. And you can register for that at civicspark.lgc.org/graduation. And Tim also posted the registration in the chat as well. The last thing I wanted to mention is that if you want to learn more about all of our projects that we had going on this year, you can check out our website and look at our project map, which Tim will also link to. We're really excited about this. This is just a way to kind of look visually at the different regions and sort of what the different fellows were working on. So definitely encourage you to check that out. And that's all we had for you. So congrats again to the presenters today. You all did a really great job. And with that, I will say goodbye. Hope you all have a good rest of your week. Thanks.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.